Right, so I often talk about political polarization in today's world. I also talk a lot online and in person with people about this kind of stuff. And what I notice is that there's a crisis of people thinking that the political landscape hasn't moved over the last, 20, 30 years. Like they still think conservatives and Republicans are the same as they were in 2000 in the 90s, and they still think that the liberals are in the 2000s and the 90s. And it's especially bad for people on the left for the simple reason that people on the left almost always, and they almost always repeat it in the exact same way, which is another way you can tell that they're wrong because they're just repeating talking points. But they'll always say that, oh, the left is center left, is center left, even though they literally advocate for socialist policy, like most socialist policies they'll advocate for, and yet they'll turn around and call themselves center left, like which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But the whole point being here is that I wanted to make a video disproving that theory. The real theory goes as the left moved way to the left over the last 10 to 20 years, so far that like I say, the Republicans in 2008 are more similar to the Democrats in 2008 than the Democrats now are compared to the Democrats in 2008. Now, the first thing people will point out is, oh, that's the states. The states is different. Well, the first thing I would point out is that most people on the left, even a lot of people on the right, think that the Republicans under Trump are even more to the right than the conservatives are in Canada. In fact, I'd say probably 99% of people agree with that. So making the argument, oh, it's the states, it's different. Well, if anything, that's proving my theory even more correct for the simple reason that if the Republicans are so far to the right, like you claim, then by default, the conservatives in Canada have to be further to the left than them, like by default. So, if anything, that proves my point even more correct if you're going to make that argument, which I think it's fair to an extent. Not because the Republicans under Trump are far right, they're pretty much where they should be, and where they've always been. The real reason is that the conservatives in Canada moved to the left. That is the real reason. So basically, the political landscape in Canada goes like this: you have the NDP, the Greens, the and the Liberals, who are in power right now. Obviously, they shifted pretty far to the left. I would say they're definitely bordering on socialists. Now, socialists will be pretty far to the left. So they're definitely, like, if you break it down from the center all the way to the left, they are closer to the left than they are to the center, and I would say by a pretty decent amount. The problem is that people think it's the opposite and that they're very close to the center, which isn't true. So, and then you have the conservatives, which I would say are basically centrist. I would say that if anything, they're even center left compared to center right. And like I say, for the simple reason that, I mean, an anecdotal way I can put it, I have plenty of data to back it up. But everybody who I know who was a former conservative supporter, voter, people who lean conservative, I have never heard one person either online or in person. I'm probably talked to over 100 people about this. I've not had one person tell me that the reason that they don't support the conservatives or they're skeptical of the conservatives is because they're too far to the right. I have not heard one person make that claim. Every person says it's because they don't say it directly, but they say it because they are too far to the left. They don't want to get rid of the carbon tax. They don't want to cut immigration, stuff like that. So anyway, getting right into the charts here. Again, I wanted to talk about a few different charts here. The first one being is from Pew, uh, and it was done. It was published in The Economist. But you look, in 1980, there was a ton of overlap between the Democrats and the Republicans. To be honest, the Democrats were actually more to the center than the Republicans. But you look in 2008, the average Democrat is much further to the right. Sorry, to the left, than the Republicans have moved to the right. Like the Republicans have moved slightly to the right. Slightly, ever so slightly. Yet the Democrats have moved so far that someone who is a moderate Democrat in the 80s and probably even most of the 90s would be considered too far to the right for most Democrats. So the other thing I wanted to talk about here is another thing. This is done by Pew as well again. So no one, please don't even try and think about claiming this is bias. It's done literally done by Pew Research. Um, the number of consistently liberal people was at 5% in 94, and then went up to 23% in 2014. So the number more than quadrupled. The number of mostly liberal was 30%. Again, it went up to 56% in 2014. Now, again, the one problem with this graph is I think that this number has definitely grown, and the last number proves that. My guess is the numbers now are probably high 20s and low 60s. But again, we need to have an updated one version of this because this is pre-Trump, and Trump pretty much changed everything for both sides. And he forced the left. He didn't force them. The left decided to move to the left, and the Republicans, I'd say, actually stayed pretty steady because Trump does have traditional liberal values from like the at least values that the liberals of the 90s and the 2000s wanted in Republicans. Trump has plenty of those values. Um, you look at the conservatives, like I say, in the 90s were actually more partisan, but that number's not changed a whole lot. Not like I say, the in 2014 the numbers are fairly simple, but the problem with politics nowadays is that the left is becoming incredibly polarized, which forces the Republicans and the conservatives to become a little bit more polarized. But the number of mostly conservative, which is the majority. Like the people who are hardcore conservatives or hardcore liberals is a much smaller percent of the population. So it would be it would be a more accurate estimate of how things are going to look at the people who are mostly, because pretty much everybody doesn't agree with every policy that. If you're a Democrat, you don't agree with every Democrat policy. If you're a Republican, you don't agree with every Republican policy. And it's the same for liberals and conservatives in Canada. So again, the number went from 45 to 53, so barely changed. The Democrat, or the liberal one went from 30 to 56, so it effectively doubled. So again, it's not standing up to the theory that the left has stayed center left, which most of these people like to claim. And the last thing is probably the most damning one. Again, another one done by Pew. You see the Democrats in this one doesn't compare to the other side. It just compares themselves to themselves. The Democrats were actually very moderate in the 2000s, like very moderate. But it was around, again, that 2010, 2012 mark where they went way to the left, and they're continuing to veer off to the left. The Labour Party in Britain is considered to be too far to the left for North American standards, but yet the Democrats are almost exactly lockstep and barrel with them. Look at the Republicans. Again, they've hardly moved to the right, ever so slightly to the right. Which doesn't make the leftist theory is that the Republicans and the conservatives have moved to the right, and it's not true. There's no data to back that up. So basically, the whole point I wanted to get across here is that you have a lot of people, mainly on the left, who think, like I say, that the liberals in Canada and the Democrats in the States are a center left party, and that's not true. That's not true objectively. And I've shown many people that believe that these graphs, and yet they still don't believe it, which again just goes to show that there's no amount of evidence that can change these people's minds. Again, like I say, they basically advocate for almost every socialist policy under the book, and then yet they'll turn around and claim they're centrist. Like that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So, and that goes to show the whole point being is that Trump is not far right. Like I say, the one example I always bring up is that if you talk to liberals in the 90s and the 2000s, what were their biggest complaints of the Republicans and the conservatives? Oh, it was they're too religious, which again is definitely something that they've you know loosened the rope a little bit on that. They're not as religious. I mean, they're still religious, but they're not as religious as what they once were. They're too pro-war, which is something that Trump is the most anti-war president of at least the last generation. Certainly more or less than Obama and Bush. Um, they want to ban abortion, which is something that again is still very polarizing. But I haven't seen. I mean, the conservatives in Canada didn't run on, we want to ban abortion. I mean, personally, they're against it, but who cares? Same as Trump. Trump. I don't even know if he ever even has voiced his opinion on the topic. So there, the issues that the left complained about the right in the 90s and 2000s, they've came to the left on almost all of those issues. Now, what did the conservatives and the Republicans complain about the Democrats and the liberals in the 90s and the 2000s? Well, what they complained about is they spend too much, they run these deficits. Those are the main things that they complained about. So did the left, and the Democrats and sorry, not the conservatives, the liberals in Canada, have they came to the right on that? Have they said, yeah, we need to really get this, debt reined in? No, they haven't done that. The debts is it's the biggest it's ever been by far. So again, the Republicans aren't good on that either. Neither are the conservatives. But um, it's the left that tends to believe in Keynesianism and not the right. So again, I mean, I understand too. Yeah, the conservatives are really bad on debt. That's one of my biggest criticisms of Trump. But at least the economy was good. Like, at least the economy was good. Like Canada, we were running massive deficits and we had 6, 7% unemployment. Like, that's terrible. In the States, yeah, they're running massive deficits, but they had 3% unemployment. Like, at least the economy's doing all right. So basically, wanted to make a video just kind of shoring that one up. And again, whenever you get into the debate of that kind of stuff, this is a video to go to. So anyway, if you liked the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. I got linked in the description. Again, appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe. And last couple things, as always, check me out on Twitter if you haven't already, and check me out on BitChute also. All the links in the description, so you can find them all there.